As many of us know, one of the largest reasons that the Orioles have put together this huge turnaround at the major league level is the development going on in the minor leagues. And a lot of the people that have to do with that are the minor league coaches in the O system. And last week, the Orioles announced their new minor league staffs for 2024. We'll run through the names, who's getting promoted, who's new to the system, plus a couple of other Orioles news and notes coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Monday, February 12th, 2024, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we're going to take a look at the Orioles' new minor league coaching staffs for 2024, from all the way up top at AAA Norfolk, all the way down to the Dominican Summer League. We'll talk about the names that have gotten promoted, that have changed roles, the guys who have left the system, but also more importantly, the new coaches joining the Orioles for the first times this year, who they are, and what their roles will be as the Orioles continue to just churn in this player development machine. Then we'll get to a few more Orioles news and notes as well, including Felix Bautista, an update to his Tommy John rehab, and some potential new sponsorships going on at Oriole Park at Camden Yards. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. And although the Super Bowl is over, football season is over, that doesn't mean things are over at FanDuel. New customers can join today, and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started today. So let's jump in first here, which will be the majority of this episode, is the minor league coaches. Now, a lot of these names you won't hear a whole lot about throughout the 2024 season, especially now that the Orioles have put together a really good product at the major league level, right? I think everybody in general is focusing a little bit less on the O system when you win the AL East and win 101 games and you go and get Corbin Burns and you're trying to win a World Series this year. But a lot of this development and a lot of this production, a lot of these great young players getting to the big leagues and being helpful and helping the O's get to this point is due to these coaching staffs that the Orioles have brought in. They announced their official 2024 minor league staffs last week. So I'm just going to go through team by team, level by level, let you know who the names are. And, we'll talk briefly maybe about some of the guys who are returning, but more in depth into guys who are moving up in the system or even joining the Orioles for the first time. And let's start in AAA Norfolk, which was named by Baseball America the best team in minor league baseball in 2023. And that was for good reason. They set all these Tides records for wins and runs scored and how great they were. They were part of the number one system in baseball that had all this top line high minors talent. It was all in Norfolk. Not only did the Tides win the International League championship, they won the AAA championship in general, had the most talent. It was a very, very successful team in 2023. And that's even with, not having Gunnar Henderson, not having Adley Rutschman, not having Grayson Rodriguez for the second half, not having some of these young guys, losing Jordan Westberg, eventually losing Heston Kjerstad and Colton Cowser. There's just so much talent at the top of this system. And Norfolk really showed it. And Buck Britton, the brother of Zach Britton, who played in the O system and has been a coach in the system, returns for his third year as the manager of the Norfolk Tides. I think Buck Britton continues to be a very well-liked minor league coach in the O system. And I think there's a potential that soon he will be on the Orioles major league staff, but he returns to manage this team. And Justin Ramsey returns as the pitching coach once again in AAA Norfolk. I would be willing to bet a good amount of money that he was up for that assistant pitching coach job on the Orioles major league staff after they ended up letting Darren Holmes walk, who was the assistant pitching coach, and kind of reassigned Chris Holt to more of the overseer of all pitching in the system as pitching coordinator. They hired Drew French away from the Braves to be their major league pitching coach, but that assistant job was open, and many, including myself, thought it was going to go to Justin Ramsey. Instead, it goes to Mitch Plasmeyer, who was another great coach in the Orioles system who they promoted, but Ramsey does such a great job there in AAA, and he remains in that role. The one new member of the staff is the hitting coach for the Norfolk Tides. It is Mike Montville, who the Orioles have hired Brink Ambler was the hitting coach in AAA Norfolk last year. He is staying in the organization and getting somewhat of a promotion. He is now the lower level hitting coordinator for the Orioles, so he'll be kind of roving around between Aberdeen, Delmarva, and even in the rookie ball levels as well to oversee kind of all of that hitting development. So congratulations to Brink Ambler. And the Orioles make an outside hire for his replacement. Montville, who had been the assistant hitting coach for the Red Sox AAA team, the Worcester Red Sox, for the last 3 years. They did not renew his contract after the 2023 season. And Montville actually went down to Puerto Rico this winter, was a hitting coach in the Puerto Rican Winter League. He was the hitting coach for the team that was managed by Yadier Molina, the team that won the Puerto Rican Winter League and competed in the Caribbean Series in Miami last week. Montville was there coaching with Yadier Molina until his team was eliminated and was already in Florida, so just made the short trip to Sarasota to kind of begin his time with the Orioles. But he's got local ties. He played his college baseball at the University of Maryland, the Dirty Terps, for 4 years, from 2011 to 2014. Didn't quite have the career he wanted. He was a really solid recruit for Maryland, just did not kind of pan out on the field as they wanted. He ended up transferring after 4 years to Division II Southern New Hampshire, where he played his final college ball season in 2015 and had a fantastic year there before playing a few years of independent professional baseball. And then he left professional baseball to create his own coaching academy for a bit up in New Hampshire, where he is from. And then he started kind of bouncing around a bit in coaching jobs. He was hired by the Red Sox eventually in 2020. He also coached in the Arizona Fall League in 2022 and was the hitting coach for the team that all of the Orioles prospects played for. So some of these guys have already been coached by Montville a little bit, and that seems to be a good step for him, again, with local ties to the University of Maryland, who will be joining the Norfolk Tides as their hitting coach this year. And then the other two coaches are also returners from last year. Ramon Sambo will continue as the fundamentals coach and Joshua Rodriguez as the development coach for the Norfolk Tide. So 4 of the 5 on that staff of that amazing team last year continues, and then Mike Montville joins them as the hitting coach. Down to AA Bowie, where this is probably the biggest turnover of any of the Orioles minor league affiliates. They got a lot of new faces in Bowie. Now, it's mostly guys who were in the system already and had been promoted, and that starts with Roberto Mercado, who will spend his first season as the AA Bowie manager in 2024, promoted from Aberdeen, where he had spent the last 2 years as the Ironbirds manager. Kind of an interesting guy, where he was like a principal and a high school baseball coach in Connecticut for a while. That's where the Orioles hired him from to come be the Aberdeen manager, and seems to be just incredibly well liked by everyone in the system. So a deserving promotion for Roberto Mercado. Now, he does replace one of the guys who has left the system. Kyle Moore, who was the AA Bowie manager for the past couple of years, is out. He spent 6 years as a manager in the Orioles system, managed Frederick for a while that was still a team, and then managed the Bowie Bay Sox as well. He was basically one of the only holdovers left from the Dan Duquette era who still had like a prominent and managerial role in the Orioles system. So Kyle Moore was one of the holdovers, and that time is over. Unsure where he will land next. Hopefully he does find another landing spot, but Mercado, now the manager in AA Bowie, and his pitching coach is coming with him. That's Austin Miney, who was the pitching coach in Aberdeen last year, is moving up to AA Bowie as well. Forrest Herman was the pitching coach in AA last year. Very well regarded young pitching coach in the Orioles system. Herman got a promotion as well. He will now be the lower level pitching coordinator. It was the kind of role I mentioned that Brink Ambler got on the hitting side. So now really Herman will oversee, again, Aberdeen, Delmarva, rookie ball, all of the pitchers, all their development there. So congratulations to Forrest Herman. Also, a new hitting coach in AA Bowie. It is Josh Bunselmeyer, who actually jumped up 2 levels. He was the hitting coach in low A Delmarva last year, but he gets the boost up to AA Bowie. Last year's hitting coach in Bowie was Sherman Johnson, who basically got hired almost off the field. He had just finished his minor league playing career, had retired, and the Orioles hired him and immediately inserted him as AA Bowie's hitting coach. And he did such a great job that he got another promotion. He is now the upper level hitting coordinator in just his second year with the Orioles system. So Johnson will kind of oversee all the development between AA Bowie and AAA Norfolk, overseeing that hitting development. I think they see a real star in Sherman Johnson, and cool that he is staying in the organization. And then the other 2 coaches also moving up with Roberto Mercado. from Aberdeen to Bowie. The fundamentals coach is Chase Sebi, who was in that role in Aberdeen last year. Tim DeJean used to be in this role for AA Bowie. He is now the full-on minor league infield coach and coordinator, and will basically oversee all infield defense across the system. And then Billy Facto, he moves up from Aberdeen to Bowie as the development coach. Ryan Gall basically just switched jobs with him. Gall was the development coach in Bowie last year, and he moves down to the Aberdeen Ironbirds. And that gets us to the high A Aberdeen Ironbirds, who they have a new manager as well because Mercado goes up to Double A. Felipe Alou Jr. in his 17th season as a coach in the Orioles minor league system. He is now for the first time the manager of the high A Aberdeen Ironbirds. He got the bump up and managed the Delmarva Shorebirds last year. It was really a great move because Alou had been working so long in rookie ball in the Dominican Summer League with the Orioles, and a lot of that talent had finally moved up, to the States and to Delmarva last year. Alou went with them. Now he continues that journey up, going to Aberdeen to manage there. He's very much a well-liked person in that Orioles system. And his pitching coach is Jordy Henry, who moves up from the FCL, where he was a pitching coach for the Orioles last year, and takes over this job in Aberdeen, of course, replacing Austin Miney, who I mentioned moved up from Aberdeen to Bowie. The hitting coach stays the same in Aberdeen. It is Zach Cole for the second straight year. He continues along in that job. And the fundamentals coach is brand new to the Orioles system. The fundamentals coach in Aberdeen will be Charles Bolden this year, who had spent the last 3 seasons as the head coach at Wisconsin Eau Claire, which is a Division III solid baseball program in Wisconsin, ended up stepping down from that job in June and then took the Orioles job in November to work in their system as a fundamentals coach, and now has been officially assigned to high A Aberdeen. Bolden, kind of an interesting track record in baseball. He's basically coached everywhere. He's coached the youth level. He's run like a youth organization. He's coached in high school. He's coached in college. He's coached with USA Baseball. He's done it all, and now he makes it to the professional ranks as well. Definitely an interesting addition. And then the development coach, as I mentioned, is Ryan Gall. He was in that job in Bowie last year. He just comes down to Aberdeen for that role and switches with Billy Facto, who moves up as the development coach in Bowie. But those are the coaches in the top 3 levels for the Orioles system this year. Next up, we'll go to the bottom 3 levels. A lot of interesting younger talent at these levels in Delmarva, in the FCL, and in the Dominican Republic. And we'll talk about who will be coaching up those guys coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. You can get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 just if your bet wins. So you can bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. So we continue on here looking at the Orioles 2024 minor league coaching staffs that were announced last week. And let's move down to low A Delmarva, where the Shorebirds saw a lot of different players go through there last year. It's a lot of young talent at that level, and they've got a first-time manager taking over in Delmarva. Of course, Felipe Alou Jr. was their manager last year. He has moved up to take that job in Aberdeen, and Colin Woody is taking over as a manager, first time managing in the Orioles system. Woody, for the last 2 years, was the fundamentals coach in the FCL in Florida in the O's system, and now he takes this job in Delmarva. That tells me that the Orioles see a lot in Colin Woody as a minor league coach, and it'll be cool to see him make his managerial debut. His pitching coach will be Andy Sadowski, who was, along with Woody, as a pitching coach in the FCL last year. He moves up, and he basically switches jobs with Adam Blade, who was the pitching coach in Delmarva last year. He will be a pitching coach in the FCL this season. The hitting coach will be Christian Paulson, also was the hitting coach in the FCL last year, so kind of moving up a lot of that staff to Delmarva, along with a lot of the players in the FCL will also be moving up to Delmarva this year as well. Their previous hitting coach was Josh Bunselmeyer, who I mentioned got the big promotion and is the AA Bowie hitting coach for 2024. Former Orioles player In the minor leagues, Daniel Fajardo comes back for his second season as the fundamentals coach in Delmarva. And then a new development coach for the Shorebirds is Calvin Christensen. Kind of an interesting stretch for him as he spent the last 2 seasons as the Orioles minor league technology coordinator, was kind of working with a lot of the different levels. He was with Norfolk at the end of the year as they made their playoff push, helping them with all their tech needs. He is now the development coach there. And it looks like Colin Murray, who held this role last year in Delmarva, is one of the guys who is no longer with the Orioles system. Moving to the FCL, where the Orioles at the moment are still down to one team. They previously did have 2 teams, but they're kind of, mixing things up and still have a lot of coaches there to work with a lot of players. And Christian Frias returns for his second year as the manager in the FCL, a great younger coach in the Orioles system. As I mentioned, Adam Blade, who was the pitching coach in Delmarva last year, moves down to be a pitching coach in the FCL, but they have 2 of most of these jobs. And the other pitching coach is Brandon Bailey, who returns to the Orioles system. He officially retired from his professional baseball career at the end of the 2023 season. So this will be Bailey's first professional coaching job, really his first coaching job at all. And it will be with the Orioles, who he knows a little bit. Brandon Bailey, who did briefly pitch in the big leagues in 5 games with the Astros in 2020 as a right-handed pitcher, was a former 6th-round pick of the Athletics in 2016, later traded as a prospect to the Athletics in the Ramon Laureano deal, briefly got to the big leagues with the Astros. But before he did make his major league debut, he was in camp with the Orioles in 2020 before the COVID shutdown that year. The Orioles had actually selected Brandon Bailey with one of their picks in the 2019 Rule 5 draft. So he came to camp with the Orioles in 2020, however, didn't make the team. They sent him back to the Astros and eventually did debut with the Stros. Unfortunately for Bailey, after the 2020 season, he did have Tommy John surgery, and it took him a long time to rehab from that surgery. He signed on with the Reds in 2021, but never made it back to the field. Signed a minor league deal with the White Sox last year, pitched in 2 games, basically at the lower rookie levels, trying to return from the arm injury. And that was really it. I mean, it seems like we don't have like the full reporting, but it seems like that Tommy John surgery, which was the second of Bailey's career, he had already had Tommy John one time, I believe between his junior and senior year of high school, got it again after he made his big league debut, and just kind of that arm injury, he couldn't come back from it. But it'll be cool to see him back in this system. The Orioles know him well, of course, for 2 reasons. One of them being he was with the Astros in their system when Elias and Co. were there, and then Elias and Co. took him in the Rule 5 draft as well. So it'll be interesting to see what he can do now as a coach. The 2 hitting coaches are back again for the FCL this year, Julian Gonzalez and Tegan Leader, who were both in that role last year. The fundamentals coach will be Tim DeJean. Now, I mentioned he was the fundamentals coach in Bowie the last few years. He is now fully the minor league infield coordinator, but he will also be focusing on some fundamentals in the FCL. But I'm sure DeJean will be bouncing around pretty much every level this year. Very much a well-liked guy in the Orioles system. And the other fundamentals coach will be Landon Lassiter, who is in his first year in this specific role. He was with Aberdeen last year in his first year in the O system. He was considered a staff assistant last year, so wasn't exactly on the development coach or fundamentals coach part of the coaching staff, but was with the system, played college baseball at UNC, was in the White Sox system for a while, was an assistant coach at Boston College for a few years, then he scouted for the Rays for 4 years, then was a scout for Italian baseball before he got hired by the Orioles last season. Cool to see for Lassiter now with a fundamentals coach role. Then you go down to the 2 development coaches. The first one is Richard Cosgrove, who was one of the Orioles minor league technology coordinators for the last 2 years. He now gets an on-field coaching job, as does Casey Day, who is another one of the brand new hires in the Orioles system. He will be the other development coach at the FCL level. Day comes over after being an assistant coach at Kirkwood Community College, a pretty good junior college program in Iowa. Day was also a pitcher at the University of Iowa in the Big Ten before that. And then finally down to the Dominican Summer League with the 2 teams down there. And these teams basically had the least turnover in their coaches from last year to this year. Chris Madera and Elvis Morel are still the 2 managers in the DSL for the Orioles. The 2 pitching coaches as well are staying the same. Diony Pascual and Bailey Vuelstick are the 2 pitching coaches returning. Jake Ratz returns as one of the hitting coaches in the DSL, but the other one is new to the system, and that is George Bell, who is the son of former Major League outfielder George Bell, who was a 3-time All-Star and was the 1987 AL MVP with the Toronto Blue Jays. But his son, George, did play some minor league baseball in the Giants system from 2018 to 2021, played a couple of years of indie ball, then retired, now getting a coaching gig in the Orioles system as one of the hitting coaches in the Dominican Summer League. The two fundamentals coaches are the same as they were last year in the DSL. That is Miguel Javillera and Ramon Lubo. And then they do have a new development coach in the DSL, someone who's been with the Orioles system for the last 2 years. It is Nick Kropidlowski, who was the technology coordinator in Aberdeen and Bowie for the last 2 seasons, now gets to get an on-field coaching job as the development coach in the Dominican Summer League. So that's the full look at basically all of the coaches who are specifically with a team in this Orioles system. Of course, there are many other names. I mentioned Chris Holt already. He was the Major League pitching coach. He'll now be kind of the full pitching coordinator for the entire system. There are others like, as I mentioned, Brink Ambler and guys who are upper level and lower level hitting and pitching coordinators who do huge things in this system for the Orioles. But when you're watching the minor league games, when you go to the minor league games, these are the guys that every single day are working with those players in those cities and those minor league levels. And really the big part of this is you need to get buy-in from the Dominican Summer League all the way up to the major league level for all your coaches. They all need to be bought into the same way of training. One of the big issues under the Dan Duquette era, and even before that, why the Orioles system was not renowned at all, is that, and players have said this multiple times, many guys who played in that Orioles minor league system have said, hey, I would be in Delmarva, I'd be taught one thing, I'd play well, I'd get promoted to, then Frederick in high A, and I get taught a completely different thing by a separate hitting coach. That is not what happens anymore. The Orioles are very much all on the same page, their coaches, but also they're not just telling. You hear a lot from the players in the system. It's a two-way street, right? The coaches are coaching them, but they're giving feedback to the coaches, and it seems like they've built a pretty good culture in the minor league system, and I think the results are showing still the best system in baseball, and also one of the best teams now at the major league level. We got a few more news and notes to get to about the Orioles themselves before we finish off the pod. Little Felix Bautista update and sponsorship updates to Oriole Park at Camden Yards. Get into that to finish off the pod coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by eBay Motors. Now, I've talked about eBay Motors before on this show, but it's about passion, it's about drive, and it's about patience. That's what brings home the winning trophy, but it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. So with all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply, eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. So we finished this Monday pod with a few more Orioles news and notes. Wanted to talk about Felix Bautista to kick it off, who we got an update on his rehab. Now, not the greatest update that we got on Friday, but an update nevertheless. As Felix Bautista went under and essentially had a cleanup type procedure after having that Tommy John surgery in October. Remember, Bautista leaving the game with the elbow injury in the game in August. Orioles said it was some kind of issue with the UCL, but weren't ready to say he needs Tommy John. They tried to get him back to the field for the postseason. It just didn't work. And in early October, he finally had the Tommy John surgery. Now, the timeline has always been, hey, he's getting the surgery then. He's going to be out for all of 2024, but he'll be good to go, ready to run for spring training of 2025 to rejoin the Orioles and once again be the best closer in baseball. And it still seems like that's going to happen, but I don't know if I want to call this a setback. Basically, what this has been called is right elbow debridement and ulnar transposition is the surgery that Bautista had on Friday. I don't know what any of that means, but that's the name of it. Essentially, and good reading from Daniel Allentuck in the Baltimore Banner, essentially, it is a follow-up procedure to Tommy John surgery, and it's not uncommon. a solid amount of other pitchers who have had Tommy John also have to get this little cleanup. Basically, they go in, they clean up scar tissue, and they move the nerve in your elbow so it kind of moves away from the scar tissue and doesn't get bothered there. And it just helps to keep the rehab going if you are having any issues. Again, not super uncommon for people getting Tommy John surgery. And the Orioles have said that even with this little procedure, he is still on track to be ready for spring training in 2025. That is good news. The one little hiccup in here, I guess, is that Felix Bautista was in attendance a couple of weeks ago in the Dominican Republic when the Orioles unveiled their brand new Dominican academy down there. And Bautista did talk to reporters and say, hey, I know I'm going to miss a lot of time, but the rehab's going well. And he basically said he didn't want to rule out being able to return to the major league field at some point late in 2024. And that got a lot of people excited. I just think with this follow-up procedure and the timeline we're looking at, it doesn't seem super likely Felix gets back this year. Now, I know return for relievers is easier and quicker than return for starters for Tommy John surgery because you only have to be ready to come back and pitch 1 inning at a time rather than 5-6 innings at a time that a starter has to do. So your build back up once you start really throwing again is shorter. I still don't see him coming back this year. I think, hey, as long as still everything's on time, let's just have him sit out this year, get healthy, come back and be the full Felix in 2025. And then the other piece of news and notes is some sponsorship news at Oriole Park at Camden Yards, starting with reporting from Andy Koska of the Baltimore Banner last week that we're not going to see Pepsi at the ballpark anymore. That had been the drink sponsor for a while for the Orioles soft drinks. They had the Pepsi picnic perch out there in left field. That is no more. Coke is taking over for Pepsi at Oriole Park starting in 2024. Some of you may have strong opinions about that. I'm not a huge soda drinker, so I don't have the biggest opinion about that. I know people have some big opinions about the water now because it'll be Dasani instead of Aquafina. Don't have the biggest opinion about that either. I usually just bring a water bottle into the stadium, but I know people have opinions. I'll give a couple of them, though. If I do happen to drink soda, Coke is clearly better than Pepsi, so this is a win. Sprite is 10,000 times better than Starry. Let's just put that out there right now. Sprite is the superior lemon lime soda, and also Dr. Pepper is pretty good, and that's a Coke product. So if those things are coming to the stadium, this seems like a win. Again, I couldn't tell you the last time I bought a soda at Oriole Park, despite the fact that I went to 20 games last year. Again, not a big soda drinker. But Sprite is the superior soda. This is a good thing. If you think I'm wrong, if you have different soda takes, please leave them in the comments here on the Locked On Orioles YouTube page. But those are my soda takes right there. And then the other sponsorship news, which is probably even bigger, although is not confirmed to be happening yet, is Jared Diamond and Lindsay Adler, the two top baseball reporters at the Wall Street Journal, put out a story last week that reported, and this was really good reporting, that John Angelos had a deal set up, not signed yet, but was setting up a deal to sell the naming rights to the ballpark. Now, we had gotten reporting earlier in 2023 that the Orioles were open to selling the ballpark naming rights. It is something that Peter Angelos had always said he was not going to do, but John Angelos was clearly open to it. And apparently there was some structure of a deal in place to sell the naming rights to T. Rowe Price, and it was actually going to be announced last week had Angelos not agreed to sell the team to David Rubenstein. A lot of the reporting from Jared Diamond and Lindsay Adler in the Wall Street Journal also talked about how T. Rowe Price had no idea, as did anybody else that was involved, had no idea that Angelos was selling the team. They were kind of blindsided by it. And of course, that sale basically cut off any deal for the naming rights from now. Now, that doesn't mean the naming rights to the stadium wouldn't be sold at a future time, but had this gone through, it would have no longer been Oriole Park at Camden Yards. It would have been T. Rowe Price Park at Camden Yards. Now, T. Rowe Price is a Baltimore company. Its headquarters are downtown in Baltimore. It was founded in Baltimore in 1937. Their CEO is an alum of Towson. So it's at least okay that it's like I say local in big quotes company, because again, this is an investment firm, which is now countrywide and worldwide and one of the biggest ones and is well known, but it was started right here in Baltimore. I'm not the biggest fan of putting the naming rights in the stadium. I love that it's just been Oriole Park at Camden Yards since it opened in 1992, and there hasn't been that sponsorship, but it's also not the biggest deal to me. Maybe it should be, but you're so used to so many other stadiums and ballparks having the branding. I mean, right across the street, M&T Bank Stadium. People call it the bank. It's sponsored by a bank, right? It kind of is what it is. Again, I do prefer it staying Oriole Park, but if it happens, it happens. It's not something I get too worked up about, but I know people do. And so that's kind of where we are right now. It might still happen, but just another person that Angelos lied to and didn't tell anything about his plans to sell. And the John Angelo's ripple effect basically just kind of continues now. But yeah, I don't have the biggest takes about the sponsorships around the park. But if you do, make sure you are subscribed to the Locked On Orioles podcast right here on the YouTube channel. Like, comment, and subscribe, and leave your comments right here in the comment section of this video. What are your thoughts about Coke taking over for Pepsi and potential naming rights on the stadium? Also, make sure to leave a 5-star rating and a review wherever you listen. That'll do it for today's episode. We are back tomorrow, and we are only 2 days away from pitchers and catchers reporting to spring training in Sarasota. It is go time this week. We're going to start doing our full previews of the roster, 4 position groups: starting pitchers, relievers, infielders, and outfielders. Do a full preview of who's going to make the team, who's on the bubble, who's on the 40-man, and who are the prospects involved. Get you really set for spring training. Take a look at the roster battles that will commence. That's all starting when we return on tomorrow's episode. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.